The moment I stood in that marble foyer, wearing an apron that wasn't mine, serving champagne to people who once pretended I was family, I knew something inside me had finally broken. But what they didn't know was that broken things, when put back together, often become unbreakable. My name is Elena Matthews, and this is the story of how I went from being the family doormat to the woman they could never forget. It all started 6 years ago, when I married Blake Ashford. I was 23, naive, and desperately in love with a man who seemed to offer everything I never had growing up in a small apartment in Queens. Blake came from old money, the kind that whispered through the corridors of their Connecticut estate rather than shouted. His mother, Catherine, wore pearls like armor, and his sister, Victoria, had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment before she could walk. From the very first family dinner, I knew I was in trouble. Catherine's eyes had swept over my off-the-rack dress with the kind of disdain usually reserved for spoiled milk. Victoria had smiled sweetly and asked where I went to college, already knowing I had worked 2 jobs instead of getting a degree. Blake had squeezed my hand under the table, and I had foolishly believed that was enough. The first year of marriage was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Catherine would call at 7 in the morning, asking Blake to come help with some emergency at the estate, conveniently forgetting I existed. Victoria would organize family events and accidentally forget to tell me the dress code, leaving me underdressed at a black tie dinner or overdressed at a casual brunch. Blake's younger sister, Melissa, was the only one who showed me any kindness, but she was away at boarding school most of the time. I tried everything to win them over. I learned to cook Catherine's favorite dishes, spent hours arranging flowers the way Victoria liked them, volunteered to help with their charity events. Nothing worked. If anything, my efforts seemed to amuse them, like watching a puppy try to climb stairs. The financial control came gradually. Blake managed all our money, which was really his family's money. I had given up my job as a receptionist at his mother's insistence that Ashford wives didn't work. My bank account slowly dwindled to nothing. Whenever I needed something, I had to ask Blake, who would then ask his mother. The humiliation of having to justify buying a new pair of shoes to my mother-in-law was something I swallowed with a smile. But I told myself it would get better. I told myself that love was enough, that Blake would eventually stand up for me, that his family would eventually accept me. I was wrong, on all counts. The breaking point came 3 years into our marriage. Blake and I had been struggling financially because he had made some bad investments his mother had warned him against. Instead of supporting us, Catherine cut off our allowance completely. We were forced to move from our nice apartment in Manhattan to a tiny place in Brooklyn. I had to go back to work, taking whatever job I could find. That's when the real ugliness started. Victoria began calling me the family charity case. Catherine made sure everyone knew that I had dragged her son down. At family gatherings, they would make jokes about me being the poor girl from Queens who had trapped their precious Blake. And Blake, my husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me, said nothing. He would laugh along with their jokes, desperate to get back into his mother's good graces. I became invisible at best, a punchline at worst. But I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, no money of my own, and a small, pathetic hope that things might change. Then came the invitation that would change everything. Catherine was hosting her annual spring gala at the estate, a massive event where she showcased her status to all her wealthy friends. Victoria called me personally, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She said they wanted to make amends, that they recognized they had been too hard on me, that this gala would be a fresh start. I should have known better. The night of the gala, I arrived at the estate in Connecticut, wearing the best dress I could afford. Blake had gone ahead earlier to help set up, or so he said. When I walked through those massive oak doors, I immediately knew something was wrong. The staff looked at me with pity. Victoria greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then Catherine appeared, and my stomach dropped. She was holding a black and white uniform, the kind worn by catering staff. Her smile was venomous as she explained that they were short-staffed and needed help serving, just for tonight, just to help out the family. Blake had already agreed. I stood there, frozen, as the reality sank in. This wasn't an olive branch. This was a public execution. But what could I do? I had no car, no money for an Uber back to the city, and nowhere to go even if I could leave. So I put on that uniform, feeling every shred of my dignity dissolve, and walked into that ballroom full of Connecticut's elite society. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. I served champagne to people who had danced at my wedding. I cleared plates while Victoria's friends made loud comments about how hard it must be to find good help these days. I felt their eyes on me, some pitying, most amused. Catherine orchestrated it all like a conductor leading a symphony of humiliation, making sure I was visible, making sure everyone saw the girl from Queens serving them like the hired help she apparently always was. Victoria was the cruelest. She would deliberately bump into me, making me spill drinks, then laugh and call me clumsy. She ordered me around like a servant, sending me back and forth for the smallest things. Once, she knocked a full tray of hors d'oeuvres out of my hands in front of a crowd, then loudly complained about my incompetence. And Blake? Blake stood in the corner with a glass of scotch, watching it all happen. Our eyes met once, and I silently begged him to do something. Anything. He just looked away and took another drink. That's when I saw him. Ethan Cross stood in the doorway of the ballroom, and even in my humiliated state, I couldn't help but notice him. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He wasn't from their usual crowd. I learned later he was a tech entrepreneur Catherine had invited to discuss a business investment. But in that moment, he was just a stranger whose gaze found me in my uniform, and something flickered in his expression. I didn't think much of it. I was too busy trying not to cry as I picked up another tray of drinks. The final humiliation came near the end of the evening. Catherine called for everyone's attention and gave a speech about family, about standards, about knowing one's place in the world. She never mentioned me by name, but every word was a dart aimed at my heart. The guests applauded. Victoria smirked. Blake stared at his shoes. I was in the kitchen, finally allowed a moment to breathe, when Ethan found me. I was leaning against the counter, fighting back tears, still wearing that horrible uniform. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with an intensity that made me want to disappear. Then he spoke, his voice low and firm. "This isn't right, what they're doing to you." I barely knew this man, but something about his certainty, his anger on my behalf when my own husband felt nothing, broke something open inside me. I started to cry, really cry, for the first time that night. "I can't leave," I whispered. "I have no money, no car, nothing." "Yes, you can," he said simply. He pulled out his phone and called his driver. "You don't have to stay here and let them destroy you." I should have been suspicious. I should have questioned why this stranger cared. But I was drowning, and he was offering me a lifeline. When his driver arrived, Ethan walked me out of that kitchen, through the ballroom where the party was still going strong. People stared. Victoria's mouth fell open. Catherine looked apoplectic. Blake finally moved, starting toward me, but Ethan's hand on my back kept me moving forward. We walked out of that house, and I never looked back. Ethan took me to a hotel that night, got me my own room, and told me to rest. The next morning, he bought me breakfast and asked me what I wanted to do. Not what I thought I should do, or what anyone else wanted, but what I wanted. I didn't know how to answer. I had spent so long being what everyone else needed me to be that I had forgotten I could want things for myself. Over the next few days, my phone exploded with calls and messages. Catherine demanded I apologize for abandoning my duties. Victoria called me ungrateful and dramatic. Blake sent long texts about how I had embarrassed him, how I needed to come home and fix this. Not once did any of them apologize. Not once did they acknowledge what they had done to me. Ethan helped me see clearly for the first time. He didn't tell me what to do. He just asked questions that made me think. Did I want to go back to people who treated me like that? Did I believe I deserved better? What would I do if I had no limitations? That last question haunted me. What would I do? I had always loved fashion, had spent my teenage years sketching dresses in the margins of my notebooks, but I had given up that dream when I married Blake. His family had made it clear that my little hobby was beneath them. But why should I care what they thought anymore? I found my old sketchbooks in a box of things I had kept in storage. The designs were rough, amateur, but they were mine. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something that wasn't pain or fear. I felt possibility. Ethan became my unexpected ally. He was in New York frequently for business, and we started meeting for coffee, then lunch, then long dinners where we talked about everything except the Ashfords. He told me about building his company from nothing, about the people who had doubted him, about proving them wrong through success rather than confrontation. "The best revenge," he said one night over Thai food in the East Village, "is living so well that they can't help but see what they lost." I filed for divorce. Blake didn't contest it. I think he was relieved. The Ashfords had already written me off as a mistake, an embarrassing chapter they wanted to forget. I got nothing in the settlement except my freedom, but that turned out to be worth more than all their money. I enrolled in design classes at FIT, working 3 part-time jobs to pay for it. I lived in a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn where I could hear my neighbors through the walls, but it was mine. I sewed late into the night, teaching myself techniques from YouTube videos and library books. It was hard, exhausting, lonely work, but Ethan was always there, offering encouragement, introducing me to people in the fashion industry, believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Our relationship evolved slowly, naturally, from friendship to something deeper. He never pushed, never demanded anything from me. He just showed up, consistently, proving through his actions that not all people would let me down. 2 years after that horrible night at the gala, I launched my first small collection under the name Elena Cross, having taken Ethan's last name when we quietly married 6 months earlier. It was just a pop-up shop in Williamsburg, nothing fancy, but the designs were good. They were fresh, unique, Exactly the kind of pieces young professional women wanted. Sophisticated but not stuffy, fashion-forward but wearable. The collection sold out in 2 days. I got write-ups in local blogs, then bigger fashion websites. I started getting requests for custom pieces, then offers to show at larger venues. My Instagram following grew from a few hundred to several thousand. Ethan helped me set up the business side of things, but he was always careful to let me maintain creative control. This was my dream, my success, and he made sure I knew it. By year 3, I had a small boutique in Soho and a growing reputation. I had been featured in Vogue's Designers to Watch column. Celebrities were starting to wear my pieces. The girl from Queens who had served drinks in a borrowed uniform was now being called an emerging force in New York fashion, and the Ashfords had noticed. I received messages from Victoria's friends, congratulating me, asking for discounts. Catherine's charity called, wanting me to donate pieces for their auction. Blake sent an email saying he always knew I was talented, as if he hadn't sat silent while his family destroyed me. I ignored them all. I had no interest in revenge through confrontation. I was too busy building something real. But then came the invitation that changed the game. One of New York's most prestigious boutiques wanted to feature my collection during Fashion Week. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of breakthrough that could launch me from emerging designer to established name. I accepted immediately. And then, in a moment of inspiration or perhaps madness, I did something unexpected. I sent personalized invitations to Catherine, Victoria, and Blake. Not to apologize, not to gloat, but simply to inform them that Elena Cross would be presenting her collection, and they were welcome to attend. I didn't expect them to come. But some perverse part of me wanted them to see what I had become without them. Fashion Week in New York is chaos and magic in equal measure. The week of my show, I barely slept, making last-minute adjustments to pieces, coordinating with models, managing 1,000 small crises. Ethan was my rock, handling logistics while I focused on the creative side, reminding me to eat and sleep, telling me I was going to be brilliant. The night of the show, I arrived at the boutique on Madison Avenue 3 hours early. My collection was displayed on mannequins throughout the space, each piece lit to perfection. The designs represented my journey, strong, feminine pieces that didn't apologize for taking up space, bold colors, clean lines, unexpected details, clothes for women who had something to say. Guests started arriving an hour before showtime. Fashion editors, buyers, influencers, other designers I admired. The space filled with the kind of electric energy that comes from people who live and breathe fashion. I was greeting guests, thanking people for coming, when I saw them. Catherine, Victoria, and Blake stood near the entrance, looking severely out of place despite their expensive clothes. Catherine's face was a mask of barely concealed shock as she took in the displays, the crowd, the buzz of importance around my name. Victoria's expression cycled between disbelief and something that looked like anger. Blake just looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. For a moment, seeing them, I felt that old instinct to shrink, to apologize, to make myself smaller so they could feel bigger. But then Ethan was beside me, his hand on the small of my back, and I remembered who I was now. I walked over to them, chin high, wearing one of my own designs, a tailored jumpsuit in deep emerald that made me feel powerful. Catherine, Victoria, Blake, thank you for coming. My voice was steady, professional, giving away nothing. Catherine recovered first, her society training kicking in. Elena, this is quite impressive. We had no idea you were doing all this. You never asked, I said simply, without heat. It was just a fact. Victoria looked around, trying to find something to criticize. It's very Brooklyn, isn't it? Sort of edgy. She said edgy like it was an insult. I smiled. My target market appreciates authenticity over tradition. It's been very successful. Blake finally spoke. Elena, I always knew you were talented. I'm glad you're doing well. The audacity of that statement almost made me laugh. No, Blake, you didn't. You knew I liked to sketch, but you never knew I was talented because you never cared enough to look. None of you did. The words hung in the air between us. Victoria's face flushed. Catherine's jaw tightened. Blake looked down. Before anyone could respond, a woman approached us, one of the most influential fashion editors in the city. Elena, we need you for photos. And I have someone from Vogue who wants to talk about a feature. I excused myself and walked away from them without looking back. The show itself was a triumph. The models moved through the space like warriors, each piece drawing gasps and applause. I saw fashion editors taking notes, buyers already asking about wholesale prices, influencers posting real-time to their millions of followers. At the end, when all the models came out for the final walk, the applause was deafening. I stood there, taking it all in, and caught Catherine's eye across the room. She was clapping politely, but her face told the real story. She was seeing, perhaps for the first time, that I was never the problem. Their cruelty, their snobbery, their need to keep people beneath them, that was the problem. And I had flourished the moment I escaped it. After the show, during the reception, I was surrounded by people wanting to talk to me, to congratulate me, to work with me. I caught glimpses of the Ashfords standing on the periphery, watching me be celebrated by people whose respect they craved but had never fully earned. Victoria tried to approach me once, but a buyer intercepted me first. By the time I finished that conversation, she had left. Blake sent me a text later that night, asking if we could talk, if we could have coffee sometime. I deleted it without responding. Catherine was the only one who managed to corner me near the end of the night. Most of the guests had left, and I was exhausted but exhilarated. "Elena," she said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "I want to talk to you about your success. Perhaps my charity could feature some of your pieces. It would be good exposure for you." I looked at her. This woman who had made me feel worthless for years, now standing in front of me asking for a favor disguised as offering one. "Catherine, I don't need your charity for exposure. As you saw tonight, I'm doing quite well, but thank you for the offer." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I suppose you think you're too good for us now." "No," I said quietly. "I think I was always too good for the way you treated me. I just didn't know it yet." She left without another word. Ethan found me a few minutes later, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Cross?" I took the glass and leaned into him, like I just faced down my demons and won. "You did more than win," he said, kissing my temple. "You showed them exactly what they lost when they decided you weren't worth their respect." The months following Fashion Week were a whirlwind. Orders poured in. I had to hire staff, find a bigger studio space, plan future collections. Major retailers wanted to carry my line. Celebrities were requesting custom pieces for red carpet events. The brand I had built from nothing in a tiny Brooklyn apartment was becoming something real, something lasting. I opened a flagship store in Soho a year later. The opening was covered by every major fashion publication. The store was beautiful, all light and clean lines, with my designs displayed like art. On opening day, a long line stretched down the block. People wanted to be part of what I was building. Catherine, Victoria, and Blake weren't invited to the opening. I didn't hate them anymore, I just had nothing to say to them. They were part of a past that no longer defined me. But word got around, as it always does in New York's upper circles. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Catherine was not pleased with how things had turned out. She had expected me to fade away into obscurity after the divorce, to disappear like I had never existed. Instead, I was everywhere, my name associated with success and style, while her family's reputation remained static. Impressive to some, but increasingly irrelevant to the world I now moved in. Victoria had tried to leverage our past connection, telling people she had always supported my designs, that she had known I would be successful. The lies were transparent, and the fashion world, which values authenticity above almost everything, saw through them. Blake had actually reached out through Ethan's office, asking for a meeting. Ethan had asked me what I wanted to do, and I had simply shaken my head. There was nothing Blake could say that I needed to hear. The real turning point came 2 years after my Fashion Week debut. I was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship conference at Columbia University. The auditorium was packed with young women, students, and professionals, all eager to hear success stories from female founders. I told them my story, not the sugar-coated version, but the real one. I told them about marrying young and losing myself. I told them about being humiliated and controlled. I told them about the night I served drinks in a uniform while my husband watched. I told them about finding the courage to leave, to start over, to build something from nothing. And I told them the most important lesson I had learned, that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's construction. Building a life so full, so successful, so joyful, that the people who tried to diminish you can only watch from the outside. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. "Do you ever see your ex-husband's family? Do they try to be part of your success now?" I considered the question carefully. I've seen them occasionally at public events. They've attempted to reconnect, to reframe their role in my history. But the truth is, they're not part of my story anymore. They were antagonists in my origin story, but I'm in a different chapter now. The best thing they ever did for me was show me exactly who I didn't want to be. The answer was honest, and the audience responded with understanding applause. What I didn't tell them was that Catherine had actually been in the audience that day. I had seen her slip in late and sit in the back. She had heard every word of my speech, including the parts about the family who had made me serve drinks at their party. I didn't mention the Ashfords by name, but anyone who knew the story could connect the dots. After the conference, she tried to approach me, but my assistant intercepted her, professionally explaining that I had other commitments. I saw her standing there in the lobby, this woman who had once held so much power over my life, and felt nothing but indifference. That evening, Ethan and I were at home in our brownstone in Park Slope, the one we had bought together, decorated together, made into a real home. I was sketching ideas for my next collection while he worked on his laptop, our comfortable silence interrupted only by the sound of rain against the windows. "Catherine was at my talk today," I said, not looking up from my sketch. I know. My assistant told me she tried to get a meeting with me too. Something about family connections and business opportunities. What did you tell her? I told her I don't do business with people who mistreat my wife. He closed his laptop and looked at me. Are you okay? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Was I okay? 2 years ago, seeing Catherine would have sent me into an anxiety spiral. A year ago, it would have made me angry. But now? I'm more than okay, I said, meaning it. Seeing her today just reminded me how far I've come. She wanted me to feel small, but all I felt was grateful. Grateful? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Grateful that she showed me her true colors before I wasted more of my life seeking her approval. Grateful that she pushed me out so I could find my own way. Grateful that she taught me exactly what kind of person I don't want to be. I put down my pencil and looked at my husband. This man who had seen me at my lowest and helped me climb without ever trying to control me. And grateful that her cruelty led me to you. He smiled and pulled me close. She probably thinks she's still living rent-free in your head. Let her think that. I'm too busy living my actual life to worry about what Catherine Ashford thinks. And I meant it. The fashion business is demanding, requiring constant creativity, innovation, and hustle. I had 3 collections a year to plan, a team of 15 people to manage, retail relationships to maintain, and new opportunities constantly arising. I was designing costumes for an indie film, collaborating with a major athletic wear brand on a capsule collection, mentoring young designers through a program I had started. My life was full, challenging, exciting, and entirely mine. The final closure came unexpectedly, 3 years after that Fashion Week show. I was at a gala for the Fashion Institute of Technology, where I was receiving an award for emerging designers. It was a black tie event at the Plaza Hotel, attended by everyone who was anyone in New York fashion. I was at my table, laughing with Ethan and some designer friends, when I saw them. Catherine, Victoria, and Blake had been invited as donors to FIT. They were seated far from my table, practically in the back of the room, while I was at a table near the stage. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The girl they had forced to serve drinks was now being honored while they watched from the cheap seats. When I went up to accept my award, I could feel their eyes on me. I could imagine what they were thinking, the mental gymnastics they were performing to make this somehow about them, or to diminish it, or to explain it away. But I didn't mention them in my speech. I didn't even think about them. I talked about the importance of believing in yourself when no one else does. I talked about the young women from backgrounds like mine who don't see themselves represented in fashion. I talked about building something meaningful rather than just profitable. And then I thanked Ethan, my husband, my partner, my biggest supporter, for showing me what real love looks like. The audience applauded. I accepted my award, a beautiful crystal sculpture that caught the light. As I walked off the stage, I passed their table. Catherine was applauding politely, her face a mask. Victoria looked like she was eating glass. Blake just stared at the table. I didn't stop. I didn't gloat or smirk or even acknowledge them. I simply walked past, because they were past, and I was future. Later that night, back at home, I placed my award on the mantel next to a photo from my wedding to Ethan, my FIT diploma, and a framed article from Vogue about my brand. These were the things that mattered, the proof of what I had built. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Penny, for your thoughts? I was just thinking about the night we met. I said, that horrible party where they humiliated me. If someone had told me then that 3 years later I would be here, with you, with this life, I wouldn't have believed them. Do you ever wish you could go back and tell that version of yourself that it would all work out? I considered it. No, she needed to go through it to become who I am now. The pain, the humiliation, the struggle, it all mattered. It all shaped me. I turned in his arms to face him. But I would tell her one thing. What's that? That the moment she walks out of that party with you is the moment her real life begins. That everything before that was just the prologue. He kissed me, and I kissed him back. This man who had witnessed me at my absolute lowest and somehow loved me more fiercely because of it, who had championed my ambitions without ever attempting to possess them, who had demonstrated through actions rather than hollow words that true partnerships are meant to elevate you, not dismantle you piece by piece. The following morning arrived with unexpected weight. I was sitting at our kitchen table, the morning light filtering through the windows of our Brooklyn loft, when the email appeared in my inbox. Catherine's personal assistant, of course she wouldn't reach out directly, had sent a carefully worded message requesting a meeting. The language was deliberately vague, full of empty phrases about family bonds, about time's miraculous ability to heal all wounds, about a sudden desire to make amends for past transgressions. I stared at those words on the screen for what felt like an eternity, my finger trembling slightly as it hovered over the delete button. There was a part of me, that small voice that still echoed from my past self, that frightened girl from Queens who had been so desperately hungry for approval, for acceptance, for any crumb of validation from the people who should have loved her unconditionally that wanted to respond. That part of me wanted to give Catherine a chance to apologize, wanted to believe that people could change, wanted the neat closure that only a face-to-face conversation could provide. But as I sat there, really thinking about what responding would mean, I came to a profound realization. I didn't need her apology. Not anymore. Her apology, if it was even genuine and not just another manipulation, was for her benefit, not mine. She wanted absolution. She wanted to feel like she wasn't the villain in my story, like she could somehow rewrite history with a few well-chosen words and perhaps some crocodile tears. She wanted to clear her conscience so she could sleep better at night. But I had moved far beyond needing her to acknowledge what she had done to me. I had spent years in therapy, years building myself back up from the fragments she had helped shatter, years learning to validate myself instead of seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I had given myself the closure she could never provide, no matter how eloquent her apology might be. I deleted the email without a second thought. It felt liberating. That afternoon, I found myself in my studio in the Garment District, surrounded by the creative chaos that had become my sanctuary. I was working alongside my team on what would become our next collection, and the energy in the room was electric. The theme we had chosen was metamorphosis inspired, not only by my own dramatic transformation, but by the universal human experience of becoming who you're truly meant to be, of shedding old skins and emerging renewed. We were experimenting with strong, architectural silhouettes paired with unexpected fabric combinations, playing with bold, confident colors that demanded attention rather than apologizing for existing. Every piece we created was designed to be unapologetic, powerful, and utterly wearable. These weren't clothes that would blend into the background. They were statements. My lead designer, a remarkably talented young woman named Maya, whom I had personally mentored from her nervous first day as an intern to her current position as a key creative force on my team, held up a jacket we had been refining for weeks. It was a masterpiece of contradictions, structured yet fluid, professional yet artistic, conservative yet daring. It was exactly the kind of piece that could seamlessly take a woman from a high-stakes business meeting to an exclusive gallery opening without missing a beat. "This is the one," Maya said, her eyes shining with the certainty that comes from knowing you've created something special. "This is the hero piece of the entire collection." I studied the jacket carefully, running my fingers over the impeccable stitching, admiring the way the fabric caught the light. She was absolutely right. The jacket embodied everything I had built my brand to represent: strength without aggression, elegance without pretension, versatility without compromise, confidence without arrogance. These were clothes for women who had places to go and important things to accomplish, who didn't have the time or energy to waste on anything that didn't genuinely serve them. "Let's call it the Phoenix," I said, the name coming to me with perfect clarity. Maya's face broke into a brilliant grin. "Perfect." We worked for several more hours, completely losing track of time the way creative people inevitably do when they're fully immersed in flow state. Ideas sparked off each other like electricity. We draped fabrics, adjusted patterns, debated color palettes, and refined every minute detail until each piece felt exactly right. By the time I finally looked up from my sketching table and glanced out the window, I was startled to see that darkness had fallen completely, and I realized my team had gradually filtered out while I'd been absorbed in my work. I was alone in the studio, surrounded by sketches and fabric samples and swatches and mannequins wearing the physical manifestations of dreams I was methodically turning into tangible reality. In that quiet moment, I found myself thinking about Elena Ashford, the woman I used to be. That version of myself seemed like a completely different person now, almost like a character from a book I'd read long ago. She would have been terrified to be alone like this, would have needed someone else's constant presence and approval to feel valid and worthwhile, would have apologized profusely for taking up space, for having opinions, for simply existing. But I wasn't her anymore. I had evolved into Elena Cross designer, entrepreneur, wife, mentor, businesswoman, survivor. I was someone who had been systematically broken down and had painstakingly put herself back together, and in the process of that reconstruction, I had become stronger than I'd ever been before. I was someone who had been told repeatedly that she was worthless, that she would amount to nothing, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection were thrown her way, and I had proven those cruel voices spectacularly, undeniably wrong. And perhaps the best part? I wasn't finished yet. This wasn't the culmination of my story, it was just the beginning of the next chapter. I locked up the studio, double-checking all the windows and doors, and headed home through the New York streets, to my husband, to my life, to my future. Somewhere out there in the city, Catherine and Victoria and Blake were probably still trying to make sense of how the girl from Queensthea, one they had dismissed, mocked, and attempted to destroy had ended up so far ahead of them. They were probably still constructing elaborate narratives that made them feel better about themselves, stories that explained away my success as luck or timing or anything except the result of my own talent and determination. rationalizations that minimize the cruelty of their own actions. Let them spin their tales. Their opinions had absolutely no power over me anymore. They could think whatever they wanted from their increasingly shrinking world, while I kept expanding mine, reaching for bigger dreams, taking on new challenges, building something that would outlast all of us. Because here's the fundamental truth they never understood, the lesson they failed to learn. You cannot keep someone down who categorically refuses to stay down. You cannot diminish someone who has learned to know their own worth. You cannot truly hurt someone who has discovered that the best revenge isn't matching cruelty with cruelty, isn't stooping to their level, isn't becoming what they are. The best revenge is building a life so good, so full, so undeniably successful, that they have no choice but to watch from the sidelines and wonder what might have been different if they had just chosen kindness over cruelty. And every single time they see my name in fashion magazines or on boutique storefronts or in business news or on social media, they'll remember the girl they tried so hard to destroy. And they'll know, with absolute certainty, that they failed.